Brian said, what I'm going to be doing is just giving some feedback on the SAVUSA workshop that I attended earlier this year. And what that was, well, I'll go on the next slide, so I'm going to put that up. It's selected sections from that workshop because that covered 3 days, and as fast as I can go, I can't cover 3 days in 1 hour. So it is very much a little selection of things, focusing on maybe some of the helpful resources and hints and things that came out over those 3 days. I mean, there's a lot of resources that are out there which maybe people aren't too aware of that can be quite useful in the whole process. So I think I'm going to be highlighting those sorts of things quite a bit. And so what's presented here is based very much on the materials that were used in the workshop over those 3 days, but I have supplemented it with some UKZN specific information and links and resources and things that might be of use to people, and some examples and cartoons and things like that. Okay. So those workshop materials that I was talking about just now, as I'm going along, you'll see references in the slides, you'll see page numbers, and that will be to that book, Constructing a Good Dissertation, a Practical Guide to Finishing a Master's, MBA, or PhD on Schedule. Copies, so you don't find a copy at Westfield, you can request it from one of the other branch libraries. And it's written in a very down-to-earth, conversational type of style. It's very easily accessible and relatable, so you probably find it useful from that point of view. The way that he presented and spoke at the workshop, the sort of chatty style, is exactly what you'll find in the book. So it's really easy to get to grips with. And then supporting that book is the website. And you'll see the address up there, exactica.co.za, on which you'll find a whole host of really useful resources. The one thing you should do is to go onto that site and sign up for their newsletter. And every once in a while, you will get into your inbox a really very interesting and very useful article on some aspect of the whole dissertation writing process. I always send my honors students onto there for the one on the difference between topics and problems, for example, because it's really explained very, very nicely with examples and helps to clarify for them quite nicely, how they should be proceeding in that. Then there are also things like referencing guides, Harvard, APA, Chicago, a whole lot of different ones. There's checklists and marking sheets which you can use to evaluate your own work and progress against, and I'll mention that a bit more later. There's information about workshops that are offered around the country. There's forums that you can discuss with other people who are also doing their dissertations and things like that. And quite importantly, there's a few sample chapters from that book. Okay? There are 3 chapters that are freely available on the site, and the one is about supervisors. The second one is about the literature review, and the third one is about editing. And again, I always, it's master's, MBA, and PhD, but I send it off to my honors students as well, and they really seem to find that pretty useful. So the sections that Brian and Given asked me to concentrate on were these 6 ones here, although I have to put in a disclaimer right up front. I'm not going to be going into all of them in huge amounts of detail, specifically academic writing and editing. Caroline is doing a whole series of them. There's no way I can do it any better than she can. So I'm going to touch on a couple of little things to do with academic writing and editing here. But I know that people are getting much more thorough, in-depth support from her on that. And then the other sections are touching on common dissertation errors, marking your own dissertation, just the basics to check against, and your tools and software. Okay, so to start the academic writing one, I thought I'd start off by putting up 2 different views that have been expressed about what academic writing is. That's the first one. I hope you can read it back there. second one. And I think the first one is the Calvin and Hobbes one is in a way very often how students think we expect them to write, you know, with all the jargon and the flowery language and the, you know. But just like the second one says, I think very often it's easy for somebody who reads that to think, well, this person doesn't quite clearly understand what it is they're trying to express there. And if you did understand it clearly, you'd express it more clearly. But part of it might also be, and what I find very often with my students is trying to get this understanding that writing is a process. I think very often my students hand in a chapter and they think, okay, that's it, it's done, and now I'll move on to the next thing. And when you say to them, okay, here it is, and now go back and work on this and bring it back, and they get quite crushed because they think, you know, they completely missed the base. And so I think, you know, getting that understanding that you must expect to write and rewrite all the way through is something that, you know, to be stressed from the beginning, so that becomes part of you know, that this is how the process works rather than a crushing criticism, because it seems to me that very often that's how students seem to take that. Okay, I've put this up here just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that were highlighted at the workshop. Style and structure and paragraphs, logical flow and that sort of thing. But as I said, I'm not getting into these in any depth. I will touch on some of them a bit later on. But the main things that the presenter had to convey about these was just the importance of starting out with a structure right up front. So doing a table of contents, as it were, or an outline or a plan, so that you have clear in your mind exactly what it is your chapter is going to be covering right up front. Of course, it's going to change as you go along and as you read and as you grapple with things, but to have that plan up front to direct your reading, your thinking, your writing. Otherwise, it's really easy to start going off on tangents and getting lost along the way. The one part that he spent a fair amount of time on and that the students seemed to find really useful was the section on how to deal with writer's block. And I'm pretty sure that all of us have dealt with this sometimes. That one actually reminds me of me, because when I was sitting at times trying to figure out a part of my chapter and it wasn't coming, I'd go and do things like writing the acknowledgements or tidying up the reference list, or because at least I felt like the time wasn't being wasted completely. I was doing something that would have to be done at some point in the future. And so, you know, the time wasn't going to waste. So some of the techniques that were discussed at the workshop for dealing with writer's block is, first of all, to set up a small and achievable goal for your writing session. You know, too often we sit down and we think, okay, right, now I've got to write my thesis. And that's a scary, big mountain of work that, you know, it can be quite daunting. But if you're going and thinking, well, my goal for the session is I'm going to write this page or this section or these couple of paragraphs, that makes it, you know, much more doable and much more achievable, and you can really get stuck into that and feel like you've achieved something at the end of it, and that motivates you to keep going as well. Also, you know, the importance of getting something down on paper, because very often you sort of want to have it perfect in your head before you put anything down, and the idea is to have something down and know it's not going to be perfect right up front. You're going to have to do a lot of editing and revising, but at least you've started that process. And a lot of the thinking through, you know, what you want to write happens by putting something down and playing around with it and seeing what works and cutting and pasting and shifting. That's the start of that whole process of what's working and what's not. Okay, and so that was an important thing. He also said write another section. And that's where the value of having that structure properly mapped out, your table of contents, as it were, properly mapped out comes in useful, because then you know, okay, this part is not working out for me now, I'm getting a bit stuck here, but let me look along my outline and what else do I need to do in this chapter. Okay, I've got things that I can write about that, you know, I can make some progress in that section and then go on and do that. Because again, as I said earlier, then you won't be sitting there getting stressed out about not doing anything and getting anxious, and you being productive and writing. It may not be what you plan to write for that session, but it's something that you would have had to do at some point anyway. So write something else was the one suggestion, and then write somewhere else as well. Okay, try writing in a coffee shop. I'm not sure how he managed to do that, but I don't think I could. But it does work. I mean, sometimes I'll find it difficult to sit at work and write in the office, but at home, where I can hear the birds in the garden, and it's not people rapping on the door, and it's not me on the internet looking for an article and then getting caught up in that and going on to the next one and the next one and the next one. It's all of that stripped away and just me sitting and writing. You know, so a change of scenery is sometimes pretty useful there. Reading more. Okay, he says that very often you find it difficult to write because you don't really know what you want to say yet. And so you need to engage more with literature or speak to others, chat to your supervisor or other people about what it is you're working on and your readings and things like that, and that might spark some ideas for avenues you might want to follow in your writing. Take a break, also important. Just, you know, clear the mind, come back to it again with fresh eyes after a while, and it's something that my supervisor also tried to get me to do, because he used to look at me and say, you're heading for burnout now, you've got to go and watch a movie or work for half a day and take the rest of the day off, or work for one day and take the next day off. But he says that's how the brain works. You give it some time to mull over things, and when you come back to it again, something will spark. Edit previous work. So, you know, we all think that the editing happens right at the end, but if you do it all the way through. So if you're having trouble actually writing something, go back to bits that you've written already and look at it with fresh eyes and try and edit it and tune it up and you know, just improve it a bit. That's still productive work that will go towards the final product. And then the last suggestion that he had to make was about writing regularly, trying to get into the habit of writing, so that, you know, often you spend a lot of time thinking about what you want to write and reading things that are going to contribute to your writing and building it up so much in your head, but when it's time to sit now and write, you don't know where to start. So if you get in that habit of doing this every day, a little at a time, it's routine, and it's easier to get into that style. Well, this is just to illustrate when you're stuck, you're meant to write something else, but it's your thesis work, not shopping list work. The second section that I'm covering is to do with editing. Now, one of the sample chapters that I said is available on that website for free is about editing. So, you know, you'll be able to read that for yourself, and I won't go into huge details on that. But, you know, he felt very strongly about the value of the editing process. It's the biggest investment that you could make into your writing. And I suppose when you think about it, once you're done with your work, it's out there in the public domain. It's so easy to go online and search for something now and find all these dissertations and theses from around the world, and your work is out there representing you and your supervisor and your institution. So, you know, I can understand that where he was coming from when he found this to be the most important part of the process. The suggestions that he had in terms of doing the editing was to start with the big, broad stuff and then work downwards towards the narrower things. So you start with the big things like structure and looking at your chapters and what they are and the orders in which they go and the logical flows and sequences and things like that. And then within each chapter, the sections within each chapter, is everything that is meant to be there in the chapter. Is it in the most logical, meaningful order? And similarly within each section, so you're working down to narrower bits from the broader. You're looking for flow, where the arguments flow and develop over time. You're looking for evidence, okay? Is there evidence for everything that you're saying, and is the evidence credible, weighty evidence? Have you checked it? All of those sorts of things. Mathematical and statistical work, you double-checking calculations. In terms of the writing, all of the things that are on the checklists in the book. And then technicalities and formalities, grammar and things like that. Also your colleges or schools, technicalities, their formalities, their requirements. Have you complied with those sorts of things? And then the question mark about an outside professional editor. Okay, whether it's worth doing that or not. I'm not sure whether, Brian, it's compulsory or not. Not in our, okay, in education where I did mine, it was compulsory. So here it isn't. But it still might be, I think, worth doing in any case, because it's a fresh pair of eyes looking at this work that you've been immersed in for so long that you can't see many of the errors there yourself. And even though you might look at it and think this looks it's okay, a trained editor will pick up every little detail, and I should know because Caroline edited my work. It was an instructive process. This is just an illustration of the point about evidence, to make sure that you've got strong evidence for the arguments that you're making, and that it's weighty evidence. And this was on the importance of editing for grammar and punctuation. And in this case, it literally is saving a person's life. Rachel Ray finds inspiration in cooking her family and her dog, which is why she has to hold on to that dog so tightly there, because it wants to flee. So a missing comma can really change the meaning. This is a famous one. You've probably seen it before, but how would you punctuate that? Where did you?
Dash after woman.
Sorry? Dash after woman. A woman without. Well, depending on the way you do it, you're going to get two completely opposite meanings. Probably the men would punctuate it this way. and the women might punctuate it this way. But it's a very simple illustration, but it does make the point that depending on how you do this, the meaning really can be affected quite drastically. Now on the Exactica website, you'll find a number of different checklists, and they really are quite comprehensive. They're about, each one is 2 or 3 pages or so, and it lists very systematically all the things that you should be looking for under these 3 headings. So in terms of the content, what should be in the dissertation as a whole, what should be in each chapter, and then you can use this as a self-check of your work as you go along. So there's one to do with the content of the work, there's one to do with the editing and the technical aspects of the work, And there's another one that's pretty short, much shorter, I think, to do with the proposal. They are in the book, but he recommends not using the ones in the book. On the website are